As a play-by-play announcer and producer, Anne Marie Anderson has done college football, the Super Bowl, WNBA, and more sports than I can possibly list. She's interviewed Michael Phelps, been at the practice gym for Shaq and Kobe, and has just launched her new book, Cultivating Audacity, which provides a roadmap for dismantling doubt and living audaciously. Anne Marie is truly an incredible storyteller. Make sure to listen to both the tragic story that inspired her to make bold choices in her 20s and for her experience calling a game with the one-of-a-kind Bill Walton. Thanks for listening. Hi, Anne Marie. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm well, John. Thanks for talking today. I love this.
Yeah, I'm pumped up. Congratulations on launch day. Your new book, Cultivating Audacity, is out. New Year's Day 2025. And I'm curious, since the title of the book, did you purposely choose New Year's Day as when to sort of starting fresh, thinking new as the day to release it? Or was that a coincidence?
No. It was very much intentional because, lots of people start off in January with, New Year's resolutions and stuff, but no plan. And for Cultivating Audacity, I wanted people to have something in their hands at the start of the new year that says, okay, I want to do something different. And here's somebody who's going to hold my hand and help me figure out how and what's in my way. So yeah, it was intentional.
Okay, that's awesome. And if you're listening and you're a sports fanatic like I am, and I'm going to ask Anne Marie about sports later. Don't worry about that. There's a who's who of sports broadcasters that have read the book and endorsed it. Mike Tirico, who I love on Sunday Night Football, Robin Roberts, they endorsed your book. What was the inspiration to put pen to paper and discuss this topic with a wide audience?
Well, it really came from people asking questions about, like, how did you do that? How did you get there? Weren't you afraid? Yes, I was. And, I felt like people just needed to understand that they weren't alone with their fears in wanting to do something different. They weren't alone with their barriers. And the more people asked, the more I began to speak about it because I'm a keynote speaker as well. And then eventually I decided people needed a follow-up, something more detailed in order to help them create a life they're excited to wake up to every day. I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah, and creating a map is so important to that. I want to talk about the intro to Cultivating Audacity because I think it's a great setup for you sort of looking at your life and your career a little bit differently. The setup is that you've taken a job at ESPN Sports Center in its early days, and I'll kind of let you take it from there.
ESPN, I started there when I was 21 years old. And the story you're referring to, which I'll tell, this is why I began to live audaciously. Writing the book became later, but what happened is, I started ESPN at 21. Like many people in media and all professions, I interned when I was in college. And for media and television, I interned at a local station in Denver where I lived. And for the nicest man, his name was Peter Rogat. He was a sports anchor there. A few years after I started at ESPN, Peter got a job as a Sports Center anchor, like his dream job. And I was so happy. Good things do indeed happen to good people. And Peter had just gotten married, had moved to Bristol for ESPN. He was 37 years old, super fit. Like life was just going great for him. And he walked in on his 6th day at ESPN. He hadn't even been on air yet. He was still training. And he collapsed behind at his desk behind a partition. And I was in the newsroom and somebody said, does anybody know CPR? And so I did. I had been trained. I ran around the corner along with my roommate who had also been through training and expected to find anybody except a healthy, fit 37-year-old on the ground. My roommate Peggy and I did perform CPR on Peter. We did everything we could. But Peter passed away right there on the Sports Center floor. And it was such a devastating moment. I mean, I don't think anybody else really knew him yet since he was so new. But I remember thinking, if you could be 37 and newly married and starting your dream job and have it ripped away in an instant, I was never going to wait for anything ever again. And I think we've all heard that before, like life is short and you heard it, but to have it just hit me in the face so much that this was what Peter had been working towards and now he's never going to experience it. I immediately said, I'm not waiting. And I started traveling wildly. I started asking for bigger assignments at work because I believed in taking those bold risks earlier than I probably would have without that experience.
Wow. It's like I said, that's an incredibly harrowing and tragic story, and it lit a fire for you. And I want to talk through kind of the different stages that you set out in the book and the roadmap, if you will. But I kind of want to skip some stuff for a sec,
Sure.
and talk about your career in broadcasting.
Sure.
And you've spoken in front of a live audience thousands of times, if not tens of thousands. And so, should I presume that you've conquered a fear of being on television, or do you still have butterflies? Are you still afraid? Do you still get nervous? Do you still get anxious?
The butterflies have gone away and the nervousness has gone away. Maybe on a really big assignment, I might feel a little bit of tension at the beginning, but yeah, I was terrified at first, absolutely terrified, but with enough practice, because it has been, 25 years on air, 35 years overall in television, I don't get nervous anymore.
One of the concepts that you talk about in your book is when you're afraid of something, you make friends with fear. And I thought that was an interesting way of saying it. For me, with experience with anxiety, or people in my life who have dealt with anxiety, a lot of times you're told to face your fears.
Yes.
Which is a little bit different than being friends with fear. I kind of like to hear like your philosophy of that, why you chose that expression.
I love that you make that distinction, because it is really true. Look, fear is going to be with us all the time of different things. I don't have a fear when I go on air, but I have, some trepidation about whether I'm going to do a great job or whatever the fear is. And what I say is you can't push it away. Some people want to push fear away, right? And as you said, for anxiety, they'll say, face your fear. For me, I say, make friends with fear, because you can use your fear to take you. Amelia Earhart said, it takes you to where your courage is stored. For me, fear gives me information. What am I fearful of? Failure, rejection, embarrassment, being exposed, whatever it is. Once you really dig into it, then making friends with fear and saying, okay, this may happen and I'll be okay if it does. And so, for example, my first time on air was in 78 million homes. It wasn't supposed to be that way. It was supposed to be like a little regional sports network, but somebody got sick and I got assigned, instead of, a regional arm of ESPN, I was on ESPN2 opening weekend of college football.
Okay, I was gonna say, It has to be some kind of football thing.
Yeah, and I was just absolutely mortified and terrified, and I was afraid of being bad, being exposed for being bad, being judged, being embarrassed. And what I tell people is, once I went on air, which took a lot for me to go on air, all those things were true. I was bad. I was exposed. I was judged by people. I was embarrassed, and I survived, right? And I survived, and I did it again the next week. And I always tell people the only thing that was better about the second week was that it wasn't the first time, because I was still bad and embarrassed. But once I got more comfortable and knew that fear was going to be with me every time I went on air or did anything new, and I made that relationship of like, okay, here's what I'm afraid of, and here's the experience I know that I can survive it, then fear could come along with me, no problem. Just fear doesn't, I always say, like, it's a passenger. It doesn't get to drive. Fear doesn't get to make any decisions for me, but I understand it's going to be my passenger along the way.
Facing your fear, or making friends with your fear, and then going and do it, and then it's in the moment. But what strategies do you have maybe to like not beat yourself up after the fact? You might be interviewing someone and say something the wrong way, or say something that you need to apologize for, or whatever. How do you deal with that?
Well, so that's really your inner critic, right? Afterwards, which is one of the 4 major barriers that I consider that gets between people and the thing that they want to do. And so the first thing I do for the inner critic is recommend that you separate it from yourself, because you wouldn't tell your friend, you were terrible. That was a stupid thing to say, right? But we would say that to ourselves. So I propose that's not your voice. The easiest way is I did this with my 12-year-old daughter. I picked her up from school one day and I said, how was school? And she said, I'm dumb. I can't do math. And oh, by the way, I'm fat. And I was like, that was a lot to digest all in one sentence. And so we talked about it. And in the same way that a lot of people talk about it is, would you say that to your friend? Why do you say it to yourself? But we took it a step further and said, well, if it's not you who says those kinds of things, then let's name that so that you don't take it on as yourself saying it. So she picked the name Jerry, for example. We don't know a Jerry. She picked Jerry for her inner critic. And I said, what would you want to say to Jerry? And she said, I'd want to say, shut up, Jerry. If he's whispering, you're bad at math, you're dumb, whatever, her inner critic was saying to her. And so when I hear her get frustrated, going, oh, I can't do this, I'll yell shut up, Jerry, and she'll be like, ah, but it's a way to recognize. And it works for adults as well. If you're beating yourself up, then you have to give grace. This voice is trying to undermine you. What's it trying to do? It's really trying to keep you safe by not allowing you to grow. And that doesn't help anybody. So I just recommend remembering that with each perceived failure, for me, it's all data at this point, you're growing. And that's how you say, well, next time I'll ask that question differently. Now I know.
I love that. I was asking before about a subtle use of language, face with fears, friends with fear. And I also found it really interesting how you decided to phrase the subtitle. A lot of books that provide maps or a way to chart something positive, it's about winning, it's about taking what's yours, etc. Now, dismantling doubt or cultivating audacity, that's an action, but the result is letting yourself win. And I found let yourself to be a really, really interesting way of going about it. And I think it's about you're holding yourself back most of the time. And am I taking that right?
You are. There's a fear of success sometimes for people. What's so interesting, and I'm really glad you asked about it, the original subtitle was going to be how to dismantle doubt and take bold risks. What we found when we tested it was that people freaked out at the word risk. People were like, I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to, risk, just risky. That sends me off. So we renamed it, actually, Let Yourself Win, because it is our own barriers, whether that is fear, time, money, or inner critic. Those are the four I identify, holding us back. And none of those are imposed by anybody else. Those are literally all self-imposed. Fear, time, money, inner critic. And so to work through those barriers, dismantle those doubts, you are then, to your point, letting yourself win and have success in your own life.
As a bit of a side tangent, because I'm very interested in marketing, is there anything else in the process of marketing the book, whether it's the cover or anything else that sort of surprised you? I think this is your first book. Anything as you're going through it with your publisher that you're like, wow, this is really interesting how the book world works?
So that's the only thing we tested. I really enjoyed the process because everybody's got their own skill set, right? I'm not artistic at all. I am straight words always. I'm a speaker, I'm a broadcaster, I'm a writer. So watching other people come up with a creative idea was interesting. The peacock that's on the cover, I did not come up with. That was the cover artist who came up with it. And I thought that was exactly the right image, because a peacock is showing their strength, what's special, what's unique about them and their plumage. And it isn't putting anybody else down. It isn't stepping on anybody else. It isn't being, that word cocky in the traditional sense. A peacock is just saying, this is me. And I thought that's exactly it. When you let yourself win by cultivating audacity, by cultivating a willingness to take risks, you are showing off the very best of yourself.
I love that. We talked about the things that are holding you back, the money, time, etc. And once you've broken down those barriers or dismantled doubt, you suggest making audacious moves, and you preface some of those earlier in our conversation about traveling, et cetera. But what's been one of your most audacious moves? Maybe one that you might look back at it and say, "Whoa, I really did that."
There is one that comes to mind. You had mentioned Robin Roberts, who wrote about the book. I produced for Robin for a number of years at ESPN. And here's the thing. I was a producer at ESPN for 10 years. I absolutely loved the job. It was like being Forrest Gump. Wherever the biggest news story, sports story was, that was me. I got to go work at the Super Bowl, NBA Finals, 6 Olympic Games, heavyweight title fights, golf majors. It was really a tremendous job, and I loved it. But I lived in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN's headquarters, and I hated shoveling snow. And I didn't enjoy, I was in my 20s, my early 20s. And I basically just went to work and then went home and stayed warm and went to work. And I wasn't really enjoying my life. I was enjoying my job. And that's one of the things I stress to people with Audacity, because we are talking about your business world, but we're also talking about your life. What do you want your whole life to look like? And so I took a vacation to California to visit my brother, and people were playing beach volleyball in February. And I was like, what am I doing? This is what I want. I was a college volleyball player. So I went back and said to my boss, I'd like to be LA bureau producer. And he said, well, we already have an LA bureau producer. And I said, I know. That's what makes this conversation so awkward. You know, it was just like, what am I going to do at that point? And as we talked about, he said, I tell you what, why don't you wait 2 more years? And if in 2 years we haven't made you LA bureau producer, then you can go. What will you have really lost? And I said, 2 years in my 20s. And so I gave my notice. And it's one of those things, to your point, John, I look back now and I'm like, really? You quit ESPN? I gave my notice. I think he wanted 3 weeks. And I drove cross country, got into my car right after the Sports Center sting. And Robin Roberts actually came running out to the car with a check for $250 for me. And I was like, what's this? And she's like, you're going to starve. You have no job. You have no. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I got to Los Angeles. I just knew I wasn't going to shovel snow. And I knew that I would figure it out. This is what I would call a worth it risk versus a reckless risk, which I differentiate. And when I got to Los Angeles, ESPN hired me back freelance to do some work here and there. And by the end of the year, I was working for them again, full time at double the salary. And that wasn't the plan. Like, I didn't do it for money. I did it for my life. But the result was, I was living where I wanted, still doing this incredible job as Forrest Gump of sports, right? And getting paid double what I had been paid before. And so I look back at that and I think, at 26 years old, like, I had a lot of nerve. But it was only a few years after Peter had passed away. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to wait. And I'm glad I didn't.
That's incredibly inspirational. I wonder, you were talking about being part of the biggest story, whatever it is in your time at ESPN. What was the biggest story that you can think of? I'm thinking, was it OJ?
Yeah, I was part of OJ.
Yeah, and that was in LA too.
Yes, I was not there when the murder happened. I was here though for the trial. That's when I moved here, and that was craziness. Just absolute craziness. There's so many moments, and some of them didn't feel big at the time, and now I know how big they are. The first time Kobe Bryant walked in the gym, as LA bureau producer, and he walked in the gym as a teenager for his first practice with the Lakers. And that's a moment I remember, because I feel like we all expected him to kind of, I don't know, kiss the ring, be humble, be a little unsure of himself. He's a teenager. And that was not the case at all. Kobe walked in like he belonged there, which he did. He's just the only one who knew at that time that he really belonged there. And that was cool to watch that all develop. It was really interesting to watch the conflict and friction with Shaquille O'Neal and how Del Harris handled that. And then watching Phil Jackson come in and take that over, the way he changed the dynamic of that team and that relationship. There's a lot that I learned from coaches and owners in sports that I use when I speak to leaders in business and in corporations, because the way that they have been able to manage people and weave individuality into a powerful group culture is something that transcends all areas.
You mentioned Kobe, and I wonder, putting Kobe into the framework of your book, he's someone who doesn't ever seem to have doubt. His doubt was never mantled. He never had to dismantle it. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he had a big chip on his shoulder. He thought about doubt in a different way, compared to Michael Jordan, compared to his parents, compared to whoever.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to ask him. Too bad that we can't. But yeah, it's something that I don't think most people are born with. Whatever Kobe had, let's say he didn't deal with doubt. I think that's incredibly rare. And for the rest of us, it's okay that we have doubt and fears. And it's a matter of acknowledging them, dismantling them, and working with them.
You've called the WNBA for years for the Aces, the Sparks, and the sport today seems more popular than it ever has been, and probably more exciting than it ever has been. It's an incredible product. Being in the arena when something's at a fever pitch, what's the experience like as a broadcaster? And maybe you can tell a story, but also as it pertains to doubt, being friends with fear, do you recognize that it's a really big moment when it's happening? And how does that whole ball of wax work?
I love the big moments. I mean, there were lots of them, obviously, as a producer, too, when I was at the Super Bowl and NBA playoffs and like golf majors. I love the tension, when you get to the 18th hole and the final day. In broadcasting a game, when I am play-by-play, not as a producer, but now, play-by-play for the last 25 years, I am thinking about clearly communicating the excitement to the television audience. And to have that kind of excitement and energy in the arena, it's palpable, really adds to the emotion that I'm able to bring in the call. I have to be conscious of my voice, that I'm not screaming, even though I want to be screaming with delight over every play. But I don't think I'm thinking about the magnitude of the moment outside of the arena. I'm thinking about doing right by the audience and bringing them into the arena, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just out of curiosity, I'm sure you have the best headphones you possibly can as a play-by-play announcer. But does it ever get so loud that you have a hard time hearing yourself think?
Yes, sure. So what they do when you're calling a game, right, and you've got the headset on, is they put your partner's voice in your ear, some mix of the crowd that you hear the net, and then the producer or director can talk to you as well. And I now, after all these years, I have them take the gnat out completely, the natural sound. I don't want to have the crowd in my head because they're loud enough anyway that I still hear them. So once I did that, it was very helpful. I started out as a college football sideline reporter, as I said, and you have in your ear like a little, it's called an IFB in your ear to hear. I would wear two of them to try to be able to hear myself. College football was, completely different. I mean, 100,000 people in a stadium at, Ohio State or wherever. So I would have that in just so I could hear myself and hear the producer.
That's really interesting. You've done a ton of play-by-play for the Pac-10, I guess, Pac-12, rest in peace, Pac-12. And, I noticed you've done some basketball work with Bill Walton. I was a young kid during the 80s Celtics, a huge Bill Walton fan. He passed recently. Do you have a story you can share about Bill Walton?
Sure. I loved Bill Walton. I only did one game with him. It was for the Pac-12 Network, which is no longer in existence. And when they assigned me to work with Bill, I believe I was his only female partner ever on air. I'm not aware of anybody else who called a game with him as his play-by-play. So I think I'm the only one. And the first thing I did was call the people that he normally called games with and ask them about what it's like to work with Bill and how he works best, just wanting to make sure that he's comfortable and I adapt to him. And they all told me the same thing. They said, Bill will not speak to you before you go on air. Just so you know, it isn't you. He likes to save it all for the air. He will not say a word to you beforehand. And I was like, okay. But then my phone rang and it was Bill Walton. And
Okay.
he said, Amory, this is Bill with 2 L's, Walton. And I said, hello, Bill. And he said, I am calling to tell you that I'm looking forward to working with you, but I am not going to talk to you until we go on the air. And I said, I've heard that about you. And he says, I'd like to save it for the air. And I said, I have heard that. And he goes, goodbye.
Okay.
That was it.
Wow.
That was it. And we did not, even though we were in the same gym at practice and everything, I knew his system, and we did not speak until we went on the air. And there was one moment on the air. I mean, to prepare for that game, John, I did so much extra work, like Grateful Dead songs, because I knew he was going to be all over the place. And I was like, I'm not a deadhead. I better study this so I know what he's referencing. But at one point on the air, Bill has a ton of notes and everything was handwritten. And he said to me as he was riffing about something, and he said, do you have any grandchildren? And I said, the producer in my ear was like, oh no. And I said to Bill, how is it you have 27 pages of handwritten notes and nowhere in there does it tell you I have a first grader? And he was like, oh my goodness, my bad. I'm like, Bill Walton just asked me if I had, a grandchild. So that was a fun moment.
When you think about the color commentators that you most jive with, do you like spontaneous? Do you prefer having some material that you go into and you've pre-discussed? What's sort of your game plan for the perfect broadcast situation?
Sure. I'd love to have a real expert in the sport, which we do get for the most part now. I mainly work for ESPN again now. I mean, I was always working for them, but I do a lot more for them right now. And as long as they're an expert in the sport, I'm good because I can ask anything. And then it depends upon the sport. If it's volleyball, which I played at a high level, I know a lot about the sport in terms of what I want to ask. If it's like softball, for example, which I didn't play, or soccer, I consider myself to be the viewer a little bit. And I will ask them things that the viewer would want to know. Why is that happening? How is that happening? How is that opening up that way? The best way to do it, and I teach aspiring broadcasters, sometimes I'll run a seminar for them, a workshop when I have time. But what I tell them is you need to know the same stories as your partner so you can set them up. So it's not my story to tell, but we will speak to the coaches together. And then if the coach says something in particular, I know how to lead my analyst to telling that story. So there's nothing scripted, certainly, but I like to know kind of generally that we both receive the same information so I can just keep setting them up just like you're pitching to them.
Having broadcast or produced so many different kinds of sports, what's the most exciting sport to see up close that the viewer might be surprised to hear, or that maybe that you weren't expecting to be as exciting as it was?
Yeah, gosh, I fall in love with every sport that I do for a million different reasons. I have never called swimming, but I love, like I've interviewed Michael Phelps and all that for the 6 Olympics that we were part of. And I love the excitement about swimming, the tension in there, because the margin to win by is so small. So I feel like that's incredible. I'm always awed by, I did a lot of golf and a lot of golf's majors. I'm always awed by the composure of the crowd to remain still and silent. I can't get that in my own house with my kids. And so I'm always amazed when people can be like still and silent as a collective group in reverence. So I think those two sports for me stand out as something where I take note in a different way than I do with the others.
Awesome. Anne-Marie, thanks so much for talking to me today. Tell the listeners how they can buy your book.
Well, so the book's called Cultivating Audacity. It's available wherever you buy your books. Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to buy it. I will say that if you do buy it from Amazon and leave a review for me, which are super important, verified buyer reviews, screenshot it and send it to me on Instagram at Anne-Marie Anderson TV or at Cultivating Audacity, and I will mail you. I had bookmarks made specifically for people who left Amazon verified reviews. So if you send me a screenshot of a review from you, I will send you one of these bookmarks with a little message on it for you in gratitude.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. For those of you who have listened to the episodes on Amazon marketing, you can tell that Anne-Marie is a savvy marketer, and Amazon reviews are the name of the game. So please do that.
Yeah, it means a
Thanks
lot.
again, and great to see you, and Happy New Year.
Thanks for having me on. A wonderful conversation.
Did you know that more than 20 million professionals and business owners visit business.com and Business News Daily? Why? It's the best place for resources, advice, and information about how to grow your business. And if your goal is to reach our audience, you should become one of our lead partners, sponsor a section of the site, or sponsor even this podcast. Reach us at business.com/connect. That's business.com/connect.